In the name of the one, holy, and undivided Trinity, amen. Please have a seat. In the stories we hear on this day, Jesus is headed into the city where he knows he will die. He knows, and we know at this point in the story, but not everyone else. Think for a minute about the warm welcome and the celebration laid out for him as he heads that direction. We throw welcome back parties for our friends too when they come back into town. We gleefully take them out and, reacclimate them to the Pacific Northwest by feeding them a series of very hoppy IPAs. That's how you know you're back. Jesus doesn't quite even make it to Jerusalem in all of these accounts, but he knows where he's going, and he knows what's going to happen to him there. Like a lamb to the slaughter, we say in the church. In one way, this story becomes a mirror for us, a really interesting litmus test for our own theology, about what we imagine happening in Jesus' head. If we have what is called a high Christology, in a fancy theology speak, that means we think more about Jesus' divine or godly nature than his human one, we can picture Jesus entering the city resigned to his fate, knowing that he carries the burden of the sacrifice of his life and that the cosmos cannot be restored without it. Nonetheless, it will be painful. It will be physically painful for him and emotionally painful for his followers. But if we are emphasizing his divinity, he is omniscient in this scenario, and he knows that it will turn out okay in the end. Moving through this cheering crowd is just one more thing he must do gracefully. Maybe he thinks, let them have their moment. It'll be over soon enough. If we hold what is called a low Christology, the fancy theology word for thinking more heavily about Jesus' humanity, then he's a criminal, pondering his death sentence, knowing that the price of his resistance is his life. And he's not sure at this moment in the story what will happen. He seems to have some faith in its inevitability, that this is how the story must end, that his Father will use his death in some meaningful way, even if he isn't certain what that is yet. Either way, everyone except Jesus is having a party on this day. This is part of the struggle of our worship on Palm Sunday also. And traditionally, the way it's been laid out is we've done the joyous procession, welcoming Jesus, proclaiming him in lineage with the prophets, a mouthpiece of God, and then all of a sudden, usually for no discernible reading, we're reading the Passion story in character. There's a collision there of the Palm Day and what we hear on Good Friday. And we just skip an awful lot of story in that last week of Jesus' life. And in today's worship, if you notice, we are trying to tease apart those events and really feel the joy of the palms, and then come into ourselves with a celebration of the Eucharist, and then sit and hear the story of the crucifixion, allowing separate, equal, appropriate room for each of these mini stories that come from the lead up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And what that provokes in us is that we hold together today both our sense of joyous celebration that Jesus came at all. And we do rejoice in that. And it is met head on with the realization that when God comes to earth, it is not a feast of fat things and meadows full of wildflowers and an easy reign. When God visited earth, it was as a poor man whose body was crushed very easily by the powers of his time. We shout with joy on this day and wave our palms, and also hear the painful history of how he is the political sacrifice of his day. How powerful enemies, Herod and Pilate, become friends in colluding in his death. We hear how his own community offered him to satiate the bloodlust of Pilate and the other rulers, hoping against hope that if they just gave him Jesus, he might spare thousands of the rest of them. This is a common tactic among people experiencing oppression, and it does not mean that the Jews killed Jesus. The Roman powers did. Today, we get to reverberate like a bell, identifying with multiple characters at different points in this story. We proclaim loudly that we loved having Jesus on earth. And then, later, loudly, we proclaim how willing we are to kill him. We were so happy to have him, we ate with him, and then we killed him. We loved walking with him. We loved it when he healed us. We followed him all around the desert and the lake. We liked his preaching and his attitude, his sense of humor, and the uncompromising way he threw down for his people. We ate fish and bread and got drunk with him, and then we killed him. It's exactly what we're doing today in the service, and precisely what we hold in tension all this week as we get swept into the big story, both of death and the renewed possibility that death is not the only winner. You might have noticed, too, that we held that tension in physical space in our procession. This year, for the first time, we processed around the entire church. Usually, we just process around the nice, tidy, presentable side of the church, from 47th Street to Brooklyn, the side we face toward the world and take care of. But this year, we're binding together the backside, the weird parking lot, the alley where people sleep and overdose, and the nicely kept garden and windows. We are holding together both the pretty side of Jesus' coming and the side that means death and blood. We acknowledge our own joy at God's dear presence among us, our deep desire to have him mighty to save us, and our own realization that we were not mighty to save him. Today is a whirlwind of the best and the worst of us, the palms and the passion. May it lead us into a holy week that allows us to examine both the glorious and the painful truths of our real, God-imbued world.